We will talk about our nation's need to get back to living out in God we trust, because you and I know that we are the nation. You and I are that nation. So we're going to talk about how you and I need to get to living out the in God we trust. When we try to answer the question, what is the difference between faith and trust? That's tricky. It's not really easy, because how do you have faith without trust? And how do you have trust without faith? Those guys are kind of woven together, and they're made of the same substance. As we explore these things this morning, we're going to use Southside a little bit, because Southside has some math, special Southside math, and we have an equation, we have a formula for what faith is. And faith is belief plus action. So, how many have ever got on a train or plane? Excellent. If you have, then you exercised faith, because you had an underlying belief that that plane or train was going to get you somewhere on time and relatively safely. And so you coupled that with an action. You bought a ticket and you got onto the plane or train. And so you exercised faith. That was a moment of faith. A faith can be captured in a moment. Sometimes these moments can come in a form of a crisis, when we don't really have any other choice but to believe God or die. The country singer Carrie Underwood, she first hit the charts with a song called Jesus Take the Wheel. And it tells a story of about a young mom who was navigating some wintry roads at night, and she hit an icy spot. And as her car is careening off the road, she throws up her hands and says, Jesus, take the wheel. That's faith in a moment of crisis. We also see it in the story of Elijah in the Bible. There was a widow who, it was a drought. We all know about a drought, right? They were experiencing a drought, 7 years of drought. And it was well into the drought, and she was just going to the pantry for the last time to get the last of her supplies to make a final meal for her and her son, and then they were going to starve to death because nobody else had any food to share. And just as she's kind of getting ready to do all that, knock, knock, knock. Elijah, the prophet of God, is at her door, and he has the gall to ask her, can you make me a meal? And she does. She has a faith moment. She decides to put her belief into action, and she uses the last of her supplies to feed Elijah. Well, God rewarded her moment of faith, because he supplied her with a pantry that didn't run dry until the drought was over and she had the ability to restock it herself. That's faith in the moment of crisis. Sometimes we see faith that operates in a moment of opportunity. It's when somebody steps up and they step out and they say, I'm going to believe God. I'm going to believe God. I'm going to believe God. Watch this. It's when Peter jumped out of the boat. Remember? He was in the boat with 11 other guys and they all believed in Jesus, right? Well, here comes Jesus walking on the water. It's middle of the night. What do? They scream like a bunch of third graders. And Jesus is going, guys, chill, it's just me. And Peter says, Jesus, if that's you, here I come. And he says, come on, Peter. And God rewarded Peter's moment of faith, and he walked on water. In the Old Testament, the Israelites, they believed in God. The army believed in God. But it was David who stepped up and faced the giant. He says, you know what, I'm going to put my belief into action. And God rewarded his great faith, and he defeated Goliath. This is faith in the moment of opportunity. We see this when the farmer leverages everything he or she has to plant a new crop, believing that God will send the rain when it's needed. We see faith exercised in moments of crisis and in moments of opportunity. We see it in moments where we put our faith in God and belief in God into action that says, I'm all in. And that's really what God wants. He wants a people that are all in. But this series isn't about faith. It's about trust. And how is trust different? Trust is when we string together faith moments. And trust is a momentum of faith. It's got a component of time. It's a momentum of being all in. Let's look at some examples of trust, of faith momentum. We're going to look at Daniel. We're going to look at Abraham, and we're going to look at Hannah. Now, Daniel, he was part of the exiled group. He had gotten captured and hauled off to a foreign city. But Daniel continued to exercise his faith. He continued to put his belief into action, and he didn't waver. And he wasn't shy about it. He would open the window and he would pray to God. He didn't waver even when his political enemies had tricked the king into signing a law that would cause Daniel to either say, no, I'm not going to trust God, or I'm going to be thrown to the lion's den. And he didn't waver. He trusted God, and God rewarded that trust by rescuing him from the lions. Then we have Abraham. Abraham had a moment of faith because he picked up his family, he packed up his belongings. And the Bible tells us he wasn't a poor man. He had some belongings. He had some wealth, and God added to that wealth. But can you imagine having roots, and then God says, hey, I want you to go. And it's not like, hey, you're going to move to L.A. It's, I'm going to show you this place. So he packs up his family. He has that faith moment, and he takes off, and he follows God. But when does that faith turn to trust for Abraham? That faith turned to trust probably on day 2, day 22, day 100, day 377, when Abraham didn't turn around and go back home. He continued to string together those moments, those days of faith, and they turned into trust. The last one is Hannah. Now, I've listed Hannah last because she's the one I identify with most. Because Daniel, he came from the upper class. He probably had a little bit of royal blood in him. Because the Babylonians, when they go conquer people, they would take the cream of the crop and then train them and install them into their government. So that was the way they were building their empire. So I don't really relate to Daniel. And Abraham, he is a man of wealth, and I don't really relate to that either. But Hannah came from a humble beginning. She was from a dysfunctional family. She was married to a man who had 2 wives. And she lived in a time where women were judged by how many children they could give their husband. Well, in that category, Hannah was a miserable failure because she couldn't have kids. And her rival would use every opportunity to just rub it in. Every year they'd go to the temple. And Hannah one year just stayed after church, and she was miserable. She was pouring her heart out to God. She was a mess. She was on the front floor. Nobody else is around, and she's crying out to God and blubbering. And the Bible tells us that her mouth was moving, but there were no sounds coming out. Well, the preacher comes through, and he's going to lock up, and he looks, and he goes, oh, and he knows exactly what's going on. Hannah is drunk in church. And he says, woman, you got to put away your wine. You can't be drunk in church. And she says, no, I'm not drunk. And she tells him her story. And after listening to her story, he says, Hannah, go home and may God give you your request. And Hannah believed God. We're going to come back to Hannah. I'm going to ask this question. When is it easier to trust God? Is it easier to trust God in the good times, or is it easier to trust God in the bad times? Now, each of us is probably going to answer that a little bit differently. Some of us are saying, oh, that's easy, George. It's easier to trust God in the good times, because when tough times come, all I can think about and all I can worry about is the what if. I'm spending so much time on fretting and figuring out and trying to find a solution to my problem. The rest of us might say it's easier to trust God in the bad times, because when we're faced with that faith in a crisis moment and our only choice is to believe God or to die, oh, it's a no-brainer. We're going to believe God. I'll tell you where I struggle. I struggle to trust in God when times are good. When in the middle of the blessings, I'm reaping the blessings, I'm enjoying the blessings, I'm counting my blessings. That's where I struggle putting those faith moments together, because I get distracted. I'm counting the blessings, all 377 of them. 377. 377. Today marks 377 days since I started my current job. And a lot of you know that story, and it's a good job. It's a fun job. It's a great job. My official title is Construction Project Coordinator. I have to think about it. I have recently shortened it to just Construction Coordinator because nobody can remember what my title is. They call me construction manager, they call me construction guru, they call me the construction guy. In fact, the superintendent was speaking in front of a crowd of about 50 community leaders, and he looks at me and he goes, and George, and he's our construction expert. And I thought, oh great, now I got to live up to that one too. But let me tell you what I do on a daily basis. On a daily basis, I get to wrestle. Not the sweaty kind of rolling around on the mat, because that's gross. I get to wrestle with architects and contractors over $1 million questions. I get to wrestle with contractors and architects over $100 questions. And it's all fun. I get to wrestle with district leaders who could fire me in a heartbeat over questions that range from $100 to $1 million. They invite me to meetings. Some of them have nothing to do with construction. I'm looking around, I'm going, I'm just a construction coordinator. And then they go, George, what do you think? And I laugh because I'm going, you guys are nuts if you want to know what I think. And I tell them. But it is a lot of fun. It's so much fun. You've probably gathered that I'm a little bit competitive. And all that wrestling, I don't win every one of those matches. Sometimes I lose. And that's okay, because even when I lose, I usually get in a few good shots. I said there were 377 blessings. Let me highlight just 2 for you this morning. There's this one architect that I will wrestle with on occasion, and he's very, very successful. He comes from a firm, one of the most successful architectural firms in Fresno. And he's very snooty. I'm sure he thinks I'm a buffoon. And on occasion, he will make it a point to put me in my place as he looks down his nose at me. Well, on day 372, let me tell you what happened. I'm in a meeting with my boss, her boss, and Mr. Snooty Pants, right? And Mr. Snooty Pants in that meeting at some point gives us some information that wasn't good. It really wasn't good. And I don't know why, but my boss and her boss let me talk a lot during the meeting. But I got the opportunity, the God-given opportunity, and God gave me the words to tell Mr. Snooty Pants that he had messed up, and he had messed up bad. And for the first time in 372 days, Mr. Snooty Pants was the one feeling contrite. Mr. Snooty Pants was the one not feeling so snooty. Now, I know I shouldn't think of that as one of those blessings, but again, I'm a little competitive. The second one I'd like to tell you about was on my anniversary. I was hired September 15th, 2015. If you include leap year and all of that, it was day 367. Okay? Let me tell you what happened. No, let me tell you what doesn't happen in a school district. My job has never had a district vehicle, a work truck assigned to it. That person has always either had to borrow a district vehicle or they drive their own and they turn in mileage. Well, you can guess what happened on my anniversary day. But here's what doesn't happen in school districts. In school districts, the employees don't get to pick out their own work truck. They don't get to take a road trip and go pick up their own work truck. They definitely don't get to do that 5 months earlier than they're supposed to. They don't get to do that ever, ever, ever on their anniversary date. They don't get to sign their name for their work truck and date it. And you know, when I was signing my name, usually I just signed George, but I'm George Cummings. I'm spelling out September 15th, because I wanted to enjoy that moment. And I thought, Lord, this is great. This is awesome. This is fun. And you're probably going, George, that's great. We're happy for you, really. But what does this have to do with trusting God? Well, I'm glad you asked, because God is always bringing me back to Hannah. Hannah believed God, and God gave her a little boy that she named Samuel. Where did Hannah's faith turn to trust? When Hannah had to take her gift. And she stuck to her promise to God, and she delivered little Samuel back to the temple to serve God there. That's when Hannah's faith turned to trust. Hannah's faith turned to trust on those days where she's training up Samuel and getting him ready to be dropped off at the temple and to live those months when he's not going to get to see mom. That's when Hannah's faith turned to trust. Hannah's trust then was tested right in the middle of God's blessing. And that's where I find myself. I'm going, Lord, I know I should be stringing my faith moments closer together. But I get caught up and distracted with all the blessing, and He's bringing me back to Hannah, that I need to string those guys closer together. I've been counting the days lately, and I know that Hannah counted every day that she had with Samuel. That she counted every day that she had with her little gift from God. I don't have a clever transition from here into our closing remarks. So we're just going to go back to our South Side map. We talked about faith is belief plus action, right? Excellent. Now let's look at trust. Trust, we're going to augment this formula a little bit. Trust is faith, and there should be, everybody in your mind, draw a little line under there, like fraction. Faith, or trust is faith, the belief plus action, divided by time. We talked about how faith and trust are different. It's that component of time. Here's our challenge this morning. How long has it been since we have exercised our faith? How long has it been since we have put our belief into action? Has it been a day? Has it been a week? Has it been a month? That's what God's calling us to do, to try and get this guy smaller. Because if you know anything about fractions, the smaller this number is, the bigger that number is. Okay? And that's what He's calling me to do. He's bringing me back to Hannah. He's saying, George, I need you to get those things closer together, to be all in. Not just in times of crises and not just in times of opportunity, but every moment. Let's get that number smaller. And every time we pull out a piece of dollar or a coin and we see the in God we trust, let's remember, okay, I need to exercise my faith. I'm going to ask the band to come as we close in prayer. Lord, I thank you for today. And I thank you for examples of Daniel and Abraham. And I thank you especially for Hannah, who reminds me that in the middle of the blessing, I'm still going to be tested to trust in you. That I can't get distracted with all the good things that you're blessing me with, but I've still got to string together those moments. And that you want people who are all in. And I pray for each of us that as we are going about our days this week and next, that as we touch money and that we see that in God we trust, that you would remind us just to exercise our faith, to put our belief into action. Ask all this in your name. Amen.